Alright folks, today we're going to be covering the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. This is the Florida version, so if you're in another state it could look different. Now I wanted to cover this topic because we're over a year into the buyer broker agreements being mandatory, and there's still a lot of confusion and hesitation around the topic when it comes to buyers. So hopefully with a little bit of additional information, people won't be so afraid of it anymore once they understand what it means. And I do have to say that I'm a realtor, not a lawyer, so I'm not offering any legal advice or interpretation of law. Now when we get started here, part one is pretty self-explanatory. We're just identifying the parties and that you as the consumer are giving the broker exclusive right to work with and assist you in locating and negotiating the acquisition of suitable real property. Now in section 2, you're just outlining the length of the agreement on a certain day and month and year and when it ends. And one important thing to note here is if the consumer enters into an agreement to acquire property that is pending on termination date, the agreement will continue in effect until that transaction has closed or is otherwise terminated. So section 2 here is a great place for you to have a lot of flexibility with how you want to fill this agreement out. If you are just meeting an agent for the first time and you don't necessarily know them, you may not trust them yet, you can make the agreement as long or short as you want. You could make this agreement for 1 day. So you're not going to be locked into a really lengthy contract with somebody that you don't know if you don't want to be locked into that. Similarly, in section 3, you have the type of property. You can make this as narrow or wide as you want if you're looking for single family homes, condos, whatever. But I really like the location option here in this blank. I usually put the county that we're looking in. You could do the city, or again, if you want a very narrow agreement, you could make this for one specific address as well, just to get in a house you want to see, and that's the scope of the agreement. Now, I'm not going to drain the next couple of sections because there's no blanks to fill out here. It's all already here in black and white. I would encourage you to read through it. It should be pretty self-explanatory, but it just goes over broker's obligations to you, and then down here, you as the consumer, what are your obligations? So these sections are great if you're maybe a first-time buyer or it's just been a long time, or maybe you're in Florida buying for the first time and things are different here. So it just offers a lot of clarity on what your broker is going to do for you and what you need to do to successfully complete the buying process. Now the whole agreement's only 3 pages, so not too bad and for a legal document. And entering in page 2 here is kind of when we get into more of the nitty-gritty. Retainer fee is something that most agents would not be doing, but they can. So it's something I want everyone to be aware of. This non-refundable retainer fee, if they put a dollar amount here, would be earned and payable upon execution of this agreement. So that's an upfront fee that you would owe to your buyer broker just to start working with them. And again, most agents aren't doing this because most buyers don't want to pay it up front, and they're probably going to go to another agent if you ask them to. Now down here, this is probably the most important part everybody's been waiting for, overall compensation. There's a few things I want to highlight here so everyone understands. Broker's compensation is earned when consumer, or any person acting on behalf of consumer, contracts to acquire real property. So they earn the compensation when you go under contract. I'm going to jump down here to where this is highlighted and says it's payable no later than the date of closing. So even though they earn it when you go under contract, it doesn't have to be paid to the buyer broker until you close. Now also, compensation received by broker, if any, from an owner or the owner's broker will reduce any amount owed by consumer per this paragraph. So that might be the most important part, because what all buyers are wondering now is, do I have to pay my buyer broker? So when you put an amount in here, you are agreeing that there is a specific amount that will be paid to your buyer broker. However, as this last sentence here says, If compensation comes from an owner or the owner's broker, so that's the seller or the listing brokerage, if any compensation comes from them, it will reduce the amount owed by you as the buyer or consumer. So what was typically done before these agreements were mandatory is that usually the seller would pay their own listing agent and the buyer broker as well. And that's still the case in most deals that happen now, at least at this time and in this area. So typically, even though you are agreeing that your buyer broker will earn a specific amount of compensation, they are most likely going to try to work that compensation amount into the deal coming from the seller. If they're not able to do that, if the seller won't agree, then you as the buyer would agree to pay this amount or the remainder of that amount if the seller only agrees to pay part of it. Or if you really don't want to pay it and the seller won't agree to pay it, you can move on and find another property where the seller is offering that compensation to your buyer broker, okay? And then you just have other compensation areas down here if you are going to do a lease or an option to purchase, or if you don't like the language or the way this is worded up here, you could just do something down here in additional fees instead. Now these next couple of sections here, this is a protection period that protects the buyer broker for a specific length of time. If this buyer broker agreement terminates and then you go to buy a property that was called to your attention by the broker during the term of the agreement. So it's a way of protecting the buyer broker from being cut out of a deal where they had actually earned that compensation for a specific length of time. So that's a normal thing. And then conditional termination. You can agree to conditionally terminate the agreement if the broker agrees to it, but they may ask a cancellation fee. Normally I would just put NA or 0 here as well, but some brokerages or some agents may feel that if they're agreeing to terminate the contract and they've already been spending time doing showings with you, spending gas money driving around, that maybe they are owed some sort of a fee just to cover the costs that they've already incurred. And down here it's just saying that the broker may void conditional termination and then the consumer will pay compensation fee if from early termination date to termination date plus protection period consumer contracts to acquire property prior to the early termination date was found by consumer or called to consumer's attention by broker or other person. So the protection period still applies even if broker agrees to conditional termination. Now down here in dispute resolution, hopefully you don't need this, but all controversies, claims, and other matters in question between the parties arising out of or relating to this agreement or breach thereof will be settled by first attempting mediation. Now in Florida, mediation means both parties, if there's a disagreement, will come together with a neutral third-party mediator. The mediator will suggest a course of action that is not legally binding. Both parties in mediation would have to agree to resolve the conflict that way. Then if the parties with the dispute are not able to agree, you can go to litigation, or if you initial here with your agent initialing here, you would be agreeing to go through arbitration instead of litigation. Arbitration is similar to mediation, but it would be legally binding, whereas mediation is not. So if you go into arbitration, both parties agree to abide by the decision of the arbiter. And it's a way of avoiding litigation because nobody likes litigation. So typically I do have my buyer's initial here. And when we get to the last page, we're just covering brokerage relationship. This agreement has the broker acting as a transaction broker, which is the most common form of representation in Florida for real estate. It's again just going over the duties that the broker owes to you as the buyer. And then you have a section for other terms down here. If there's anything not already covered, any special conditions that you and your buyer broker want to include, you can do that here. And finally, in a final acknowledgement, consumer has read the agreement and understands its contents. Brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with consumer. And you just have places for consumers and broker or authorized associate to sign. And that's it. So hopefully this clears up a lot of questions that people may have about the Florida Buyer Brokerage Agreement. Again, you have a lot of flexibility here based on the term of the agreement, the location of the agreement, where you're looking for homes, and what kind of compensation that you are agreeing to pay the buyer broker. If you still have any further questions, please drop a comment and I will be sure to answer them. If you found this information helpful, please like and give me a follow for more real estate and Palm Coast related information. And thank you so much for listening.